The Grand Archivist KZRRT of the Cathar Data Repository Clade adjusted the sensitivity of his perception apparatus for the fourth time that cycle. It wasn't that the readings were unclear. On the contrary, they were perfectly legible, but rather that they made no logical sense. Reluctantly, he began to draft his preliminary report on the anomaly. Observation Entry 17,829 Gamma, concerning the psychological profile of the species Homo sapiens and their apparent lack of standard breaking point patterns. The galactic concordance had maintained relative peace among the thousands of sapient species for nearly 12 millennia. This remarkable achievement wasn't built on naive idealism or even mutual respect, but rather on a practical understanding that every species had fundamental psychological and biological boundaries, breaking points that, when reached, produced predictable behaviors. These breaking points were the cornerstones of interstellar diplomacy, conflict resolution, and strategic planning. Until humans arrived. KZRRT had been assigned to observe them shortly after their acceptance into the concordance 50 cycles ago. They were unremarkable physically, carbon-based, bilaterally symmetrical, with average sensory capabilities, but their psychological profile had resisted standard categorization since first contact. High-ranking members of the archival directorate suspected there might be something unusual about them, which is why KZRRT, with his impeccable record of objective analysis, had been tasked with this assignment. What had begun as a routine cataloging project had become increasingly disturbing. The incident that first triggered KZRRT suspicions was relatively minor. A dispute over trade rights in the Orion Spur, a region of minimal strategic importance. The Glyptians, a species known for their rigid adherence to ceremonial protocol, had deliberately bogged down negotiations with a human delegation by introducing increasingly complex ritual requirements, a standard tactic designed to push opponents to their breaking point of frustration, after which most species would either concede unfavorable terms or abandon negotiations entirely. Humans were known to value efficiency and directness in communication. The Glyptian strategy should have worked perfectly. It didn't. Instead of displaying the predicted frustration, the human negotiators demonstrated peculiar patience. They participated in each ritual with careful precision while simultaneously pursuing seemingly unrelated lines of inquiry. They made small concessions that appeared generous but subtly shifted the dynamics of the interaction. Most disturbingly, they began mirroring Glyptian ceremonial behaviors with slight variations that, while technically correct, created a sense of unease among the Glyptian delegation. The humans exhibited no standard stress responses, KZRRT noted in his report. Their biometric readings indicated increased cognitive activity rather than emotional distress. They appeared to be systematically mapping Glyptian social patterns rather than focusing on the negotiation objectives. After 72 standard units of ceremonial deadlock, well beyond the point where any known species would have reached their tolerance threshold, the Glyptians unexpectedly conceded all major points to the humans, requesting only minimal face-saving concessions. This represents a significant cognitive anomaly, KZRRT concluded in his preliminary report. Either humans possess no breaking point in relation to procedural frustration, or, more concerning, they have developed techniques to not only resist their own breaking points, but to identify and exploit the breaking points of other species. KZRT's superiors had dismissed his concerns as overly cautious. Young species often display unusual adaptability, the elder archiver had commented. They will develop more predictable patterns as they integrate into galactic society. That was before the Meridian Convergence incident. The discovery of a stable wormhole nexus in the Meridian sector had drawn the attention of every major power in the quadrant. Control of this strategic location would transform interstellar trade and military projection capabilities throughout 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. More importantly, preliminary scans had detected traces of chromium 379, an exceptionally rare element essential for advanced quantum navigation systems, on several planets accessible only through the convergence. Almost immediately, Competing claims emerge from a half-dozen powerful species. The Rhylac Dominion, a militaristic species known for their logical precision, claimed the convergence based on prior exploration rights. Their breaking point was well documented. When faced with logical asymmetry or paradox, they would become irrationally aggressive, often resorting to direct force rather than continuing negotiations. The Corvidian Alliance, a collective of hive mind, colony organisms, based their claim on proximity to their core systems. Under time pressure, Corvidians would predictably fragment into competing internal factions, rendering them diplomatically ineffective. The silicate weavers, ancient crystalline entities who communicated through mathematical constructs, cited historical records suggesting they had discovered, and subsequently lost, the convergence millennia ago. Challenge their fundamental mathematical principles, and they would enter a state of computational paralysis. The humans entered the dispute last, making a modest claim based on geographical proximity to one of their frontier colonies. Their presentation was reasonable, well-documented, and seemingly straightforward. Yet KZRT noticed troubling patterns in their approach. The human delegation appears more focused on observing the reactions of other species than on advancing their own position, he noted in his daily observation log. They ask questions that seem innocuous, but consistently probe areas of known psychological sensitivity for each species. Their apparently random concessions and proposals create asymmetrical decision frameworks, precisely the type that would destabilize Rhylac cognitive processes. As negotiations intensified, KZRT detected extensive human intelligence gathering operations. They weren't just collecting information on resources and strategic positions. They were systematically mapping stress responses and tolerance thresholds of the other species. Human diplomatic communications contain structured information gaps that compel other species to reveal their cognitive frameworks when filling in those gaps. KZRT reported to the increasingly concerned archival directorate. They appear to be creating a comprehensive psychological profile of each competing species. As tensions mounted, the humans offered a series of cooperative proposals that, upon KRT's analysis, would actually intensify conflicts between the other parties rather than resolve them. Each proposal contained elements that would subtly trigger stress responses in at least one competing species. The humans are not negotiating, KZRT concluded with growing alarm. They're conducting psychological warfare disguised as diplomacy. 16 cycles into the negotiations, the breaking point of the Rhylac became evident. The humans had introduced a proposal containing a subtle logical paradox regarding resource allocation, one that would be imperceptible to most species, but devastatingly obvious to the Rhylac mentality. As predicted, the Rhylac delegation erupted in coordinated fury, threatening military action before abruptly withdrawing from negotiations. The departure of the Rhylac created an immediate power vacuum and compressed decision timelines for the remaining parties. The Corvidian Alliance, faced with the sudden need to reformulate their strategy, began exhibiting signs of internal fragmentation. Within days, their previously unified position had splintered into competing approaches, effectively neutralizing them as serious contenders. Meanwhile, the human delegation introduced what they called a mathematical framework for equitable distribution that relied on non-Euclidean geometric principles, directly challenging the fundamental mathematical constructs of the silicate weavers. As KZRT had anticipated, the crystalline entities entered a state of computational suspension, their decision-making processes temporarily paralyzed as they struggled to integrate the contradictory mathematical paradigm. Throughout this systematic dismantling of their competition, the humans maintained an appearance of helpful concern. They offered assistance to each species in crisis, assistance that invariably seemed to exacerbate the very problems it purported to solve. They expressed formal regret at the breakdown of negotiations while quietly consolidating their position. The humans are not responding to provocations with a breaking point of their own, KZRT reported urgently to the archival directorate. Instead, they appear capable of identifying, predicting, and even tactically inducing breaking points in other species. Their apparent calm masks complex calculations. I believe they may be pursuing an outcome entirely different from what they publicly claim. With the Rylac withdrawn, the Corvidians fractured, and the Silicate Weavers in computational stasis, only one major competitor remained: the K'Arthur Empire, a physically imposing species known for their hierarchical social structure and overwhelming military might. The K'Arthur had remained relatively passive during earlier negotiations, confident in their ability to impose a solution through strength if diplomacy failed. As the K'Arthur finally moved to assert their dominance, they found themselves increasingly isolated. The humans had quietly built a coalition of minor species through targeted concessions and protection. Guarantees. More disturbingly, they had gathered extensive intelligence on K'Arthur military capabilities and psychological vulnerabilities. The K'Arthur Supreme Hierarch, frustrated by the humans' continued lack of predictable responses and the collapse of expected opposition from other major powers, made a fateful decision. If humans truly had no breaking point related to diplomatic pressure or threats, perhaps they would break when faced with actual losses. Without warning, K'Arthur battle fleets launched a devastating attack on Nova Terra, a significant human colony world near the disputed convergence. The assault was brutal and efficient, destroying orbital defenses and causing substantial casualties before the humans could mount an effective response. When the K'Arthur fleets withdrew, nearly 30% of the colony's infrastructure lay in ruins, and thousands of human lives had been lost. The galactic community braced for the humans' breaking point, expecting hysteria, righteous outrage, desperate pleas for assistance, or immediate military retaliation. None came. Instead, there was an eerie silence. The human diplomatic channels went quiet except for a brief, formal acknowledgement of the attack and a request for emergency medical assistance for their wounded. No declarations of war. No retaliatory strikes. No emotional outbursts in the concordance chambers. The silence extended for nearly a full cycle. The only signs of human activity were heavily encrypted communication bursts between their worlds and unusual logistical movements that defied easy explanation. Through indirect channels, K'Arthur detected extreme internal tension within human society, but no external signs of fracturing. The K'Arthur, interpreting this silence as shock or institutional paralysis, prepared for a second, more decisive strike that would force the humans to concede the convergence completely. Their battle fleets assembled at the edge of human space, weapons primed and targeting systems active. That's when the humans unveiled their solution. It wasn't a conventional weapon. It wasn't even recognizable as a weapon by standard concordance definitions. Human ships at the edge of their territory activated what they called a foundational consensus enforcement tool, a complex quantum field that altered the fundamental physical constants within a limited region of space. The changes were minuscule by most measurements. Planck's constant shifted by less than 1 part in a billion. The strong nuclear force weakened by an equally tiny fraction, but the effects were catastrophically specific to K'Arthur technology and biology. The crystalline neural networks that formed the basis of K'Arthur consciousness operated on quantum principles that required precise physical constants. As the altered field expanded to encompass their fleet, their neural networks began to destabilize. It wasn't pain or death that the K'Arthur experienced. It was something far worse, a fundamental alteration of their consciousness. Their hierarchical thought patterns dissolved, replaced by a profound state of egalitarian empathy, the exact opposite of their natural psychology. Throughout the K'Arthur fleet, crews abandoned their battle stations, overwhelmed by sudden emotional connections to their intended victims. Command structures collapsed as the concept of hierarchy became temporarily incomprehensible. Weapons systems were voluntarily disabled as the very idea of causing harm became psychologically unbearable. Within hours, the entirety of the mighty K'Arthur attack force had effectively neutralized itself without a single direct casualty. Their ships drifted powerless, their crews incapacitated not by violence, but by an engineered psychological transformation that violated the most fundamental aspects of their being. 3 cycles later, in an emergency session of the Concordance General Assembly, the human delegation calmly explained what they had done. They described their device as a non-lethal peacekeeping intervention necessary to prevent further aggression. They emphasized that no KR had died as a direct result of the field's activation. The temporary alteration of physical constants within a contained spatial region does not violate the letter of the Concordance prohibitions against weapons of mass destruction or psychological warfare, the human representative stated with clinical precision. No permanent harm was intended, and the effects will naturally dissipate within 20 cycles, allowing the KR to return to their normal psychological state. What the human representative failed to mention was that 20 cycles of forced psychological inversion had already shattered KR society beyond recognition. The empire, built on strict hierarchy and unified purpose, had collapsed into chaotic fragments, with formerly lower castes refusing to return to subordinate positions and military units transformed into pacifist. Commune. Even after the quantum effects wore off, the social damage would be irreparable. The Concordance erupted in shock, horror, and fear. The human action clearly violated the spirit, if not the letter, of countless treaties regarding warfare and intervention. Debates raged about the legality and ethics of their solution. This is consciousness-scale genocide without physical death, the Gliptian representative declared. A violation more profound than mere killing. The humans have weaponized reality itself. The silicate weavers communicated through their mathematical constructs. No defense is possible against an enemy willing to alter the fundamental constants of existence. Yet under the immense pressure of having witnessed the effortless neutralization of one of the galaxy's most powerful military forces, the Concordance found itself unable to reach consensus on how to respond. The humans had exploited a loophole in galactic law that no one had thought to close, because no one had imagined such an attack was possible. The KR, their society in ruins and their military neutralized, had no choice but to accept human terms: complete withdrawal from the disputed region, substantial reparation for the attack on Novaterra, and partial disarmament of their remaining military assets. The humans gained control of the Meridian Convergence and its valuable resources. In the aftermath, the human diplomatic corps worked tirelessly to classify their new technology in ways that avoided direct condemnation as a war crime. They called it a foundational consensus enforcement tool, or a harmonic societal stabilizer. They emphasized its non-lethal nature and that it had only been deployed in response to clear aggression. KZRRT submitted his final report to the Archival Directorate with a sense of profound disquiet. Asterisk, humans do not possess breaking points in the traditional sense. Instead, they have what might be termed transformation points or compelled innovation points. When pushed toward what would be a breaking point for other species, humans instead create something entirely new, often something that transcends existing moral and legal frameworks. Asterisk. Asterisk. This capacity makes them uniquely dangerous. Where other species can be relied upon to act within predictable patterns when stressed to their limits, humans transform stress into innovation. Often innovation so radical that existing prohibitions have not anticipated it. Asterisk. Asterisk. Most disturbing is their apparent ability to operate on multiple cognitive levels simultaneously. While their diplomats participated in standard negotiations, their scientists were developing means to fundamentally alter reality itself to achieve their objectives. They do not merely adapt to the rules of engagement. They change those rules when conventional approaches fail. Asterisk. Asterisk. I recommend that the Archival Directorate classify humans as a Level 1 existential anomaly. They represent a species capable of reshaping the parameters of reality to serve their goals when sufficiently pressured. The traditional diplomatic approach of identifying and exploiting breaking points is not only ineffective, but potentially catastrophically counterproductive when applied to humans. Pushing humans to their limits does not cause them to break. It causes them to transform, often in ways that render our existing categories of understanding obsolete. Asterisk. Asterisk, in essence, what other species would consider their breaking point, humans convert into a strategic advantage, one that often resembles what we would classify as a war crime, if only we had thought to prohibit it beforehand. Asterisk. The galaxy was left struggling to adapt to a new reality. The old stability based on predictable breaking points had been shattered. Other species now had to account for the possibility that humans, when cornered, might transform their worst moment into a terrifying advantage, a war crime too creative to have been banned yet. As KZRRT filed his report and prepared for reassignment, he could not shake a deeply troubling thought. The humans hadn't seemed surprised by their success. Everything, from their patience with the Glyptians to their methodical dismantling of opposition at the Convergence to their measured response to the K'Ardhar attack, suggested not improvisation, but implementation of a carefully considered strategy, which raised a final, chilling question. If this was what humans could accomplish when pushed to their limits by the K'Ardhar, what might they be capable of if the entire Concordance ever truly threatened them? Across the galaxy, diplomats, strategists, and military leaders found themselves facing a new and uncomfortable reality. In a universe where every species had a breaking point, humanity's breaking point wasn't breaking at all. It was breakthrough. And no one knew how to defend against an enemy whose greatest vulnerability was, paradoxically, their greatest strength. In the shadowed chambers of the Archival Directorate, KZRT's report was sealed with the highest security classification. Attached to it was a new diplomatic directive to be distributed throughout the Concordance. Asterisk, when dealing with humans, avoid pushing them to their limits. You may not like what they become when they have nowhere else to go. Asterisk. Meanwhile, on Earth, the Human Strategic Response Division added another successful case study to their classified archives. Operation Paradigm Shift had achieved all primary objectives with minimal human casualties. The Meridian Convergence was secure. The Chromium-379 deposits would soon be available for exploitation. The K'Ardhar threat had been neutralized without a protracted military conflict. And most importantly, the galaxy had learned a valuable lesson about human nature, one that would deter similar challenges for generations to come. It worked exactly as we projected, noted Strategic Director Helena Vartanian in her classified summary. Species that rely on identifying psychological breaking points inherently cannot comprehend a species that transforms breaking points into innovation. Their very methodology blinds them to our greatest strength. She closed the file with a final observation. They keep expecting us to break. They haven't realized yet that humans don't break. We break through. Around her, the lights of the operations center reflected off the glossy surface of the table where the original plans for the quantum field generator had been drawn up, not in the aftermath of the K'Ardhar attack, as the galaxy believed, but 3 years before the first human ship had ever approached the Meridian Convergence. After all, humans had learned long ago that the best time to prepare for being pushed to your breaking point was long before anyone started pushing.